I became a practicing physician over 30 years ago, delivered well in excess of 4,000 babies. And I feel like right now in my Senate career and where the Senate is, that I'm like the father in the waiting room. I keep wondering when we're going to make any progress, when we're actually going to have the delivery of something positive for the country. And what we're seeing this week is really disappointing to me, because if you read just the headlines in the last 4 days, here's the headlines about Congress. Here's today's Politico. The lamest lame duck looms over Congress. Ducks will roost in a do-nothing Congress. December will be the lamest lame duck session in a long time. The Economist. Congress is useless. America's legislature has become something of a joke in recent years, a place where good policy ideas go to die and where decent policy ideas go to be twisted into something incomprehensible. It's enough to make one lose faith in representative democracy, I tell you. And then CNN. Congress has taken off the whole year. But here's the current math. What's less than nothing? And if you do less than nothing, at what point does it become completely counterproductive and silly? That's our debate, the sum total of our big ideas right now. Not wanting to start any fights within your own party, unity above all heading into the midterm election. So what's the political solution? No substance, no ideas, no serious debate that might actually engage voters. Each side suits up, armed with its slogans and its bromides. CNN, Congress defined, useless, worthless, a joke. That's according to the most recent response of popular responses on CNN's website, 5,000 respondents on social media. Still trying to get a pulse on the most common feelings toward Congress? The other words on the top 10 list are incompetent, corrupt, lazy, inept, idiot, selfish, and dysfunctional. I describe Congress with 2 words, he said, term limits. Then CNN, according to a Washington Post poll, majority of Americans feel their representatives in Congress are part of the problem. Washington Post, Congress is making a lot of history by being so unpopular. You know, the real topic of today is what is not happening in the U.S. Congress. Let me describe where we are. We're going to have an excess of $500 billion in money this year that we borrowed that we won't pay for. We've got a continuing resolution coming with $49 billion worth of fake dollars in it, so everybody can say they stayed within the requirements of the Ryan-Murray Agreement. So there's no integrity in that. We've done nothing to markedly increase the opportunity for jobs in America. What's not happening is a reversal of the decline in the median family income in this country, which is now at 1988 levels. The big story is what is not happening. The big story is Congress is not addressing the needs of the nation. The big story is Congress hadn't passed the first appropriation bill. The big story is what is not happening. It's not what's happening here. What's happening here is a political farce. Everybody knows it. It's all about the election. It's all about reemphasizing where we are, and the country suffers for it. So we know that there's no opportunity to actually amend the bill on the floor, but I have filed an amendment which would place term limits on members of Congress. Because you see, the number one requirement right now in this body for most politicians of both sides is get reelected. That's why we're not addressing the real issues. That's why we're not addressing the fraud in the Social Security disability system. That's why we threw $30 billion at the VA system rather than effectively rearranged and totally rewrote the VA healthcare system. Cybersecurity is an important thing for this country. Bills have passed out of the Homeland Security Committee. Bills have passed out on both, these are all bipartisan bills, have passed out of the Senate Intelligence Committee. What's not happening? They're not coming to the floor, even though that's a great threat to our country right now. Because what's important is what's important to the politicians, and not what's important for the long run, best thing for our country. So what we really ought to have, if we're going to amend the Bill of Rights, and if we're going to take free speech away from people in this country, then what we ought to do is at least do something to secure the future, to say that our own worst tendencies won't be exaggerated in the future by putting term limits on members of Congress. This system is rigged for incumbents. It's totally rigged for incumbents. You know, at one point last year, the approval rating for Congress got down to 8%. That means only 1 in 12 people in this country thought Congress, and it's barely better than that now, I think it's 12 or 14%. 1 in 6 or 7 people have confidence that we have their back, that our motivations are pure in terms of we want to fix the problems with our country. They see the lack of leadership. They see the political posturing. And they don't like what they see. Because what they see is selfishness. They see politicians putting themselves first and the country second. That's where we are. It's the dirty little secret that people won't talk about, but innately Americans outside of Washington know is true. So we have a bill on the floor to amend, for the first time in history, the Bill of Rights, to limit First Amendment speech. Why? Because Supreme Court rulings have maybe changed the dynamics in terms of elections. Well, if you didn't care if you got reelected, you wouldn't care about that. So we find ourselves only going to be here in session, actively in Congress before the election in early November, 7, 8 more days. So everybody that's up for re-election and those that aren't can go out and campaign and raise money so that we can continue the progress of career politicians and the rigged incumbent advantage stay in process. So I know it's not in order to offer my amendment. It's been filed. But one way to fix that is put term limits on members of the Senate. You know, Oklahoma had term limits for its members of Congress. Oklahomans believe in it. It's actually an 72 to 80% issue all across the country. Americans believe in it. But the politicians in Washington are never going to vote for it because it puts them second and the country first. We have a defense authorization bill that needs to be passed. Critical for the future of our country. We're not talking about it. We're not doing anything on it. We have, as I mentioned, several cyber bills that need to be passed that have gone through committee, that have been bipartisan bills, not on the floor. We have significant appropriation bills that need to have the attention of the members of Congress, and this is not the committee's fault. The committee is a bipartisan committee and has done good work. This is a leadership problem within the Senate. They've done their work, but can't come to the floor because we don't want to have to take votes and defend those votes back home. So when you read what the press says about Congress, they're actually pretty nice to us given where we are. We're lame duck. We've taken the year off. We're worthless. We're a joke. We're useless. Incompetent, corrupt, lazy, inept. I don't think those words are too harsh. We put another, we're repeating votes that we've already voted, that are political votes, that are designed to enhance turnout in certain groups. And so what this place is it's a show place. And the downside is the country suffers. Our country. Whether you're a conservative male, 66 years old like me, or you're a liberal Latino female at 18, our country suffers. Because our eyes off the ball, our eyes off our oath that we took, our eye is off our commitment and the historical lineage that has been here before us of members of Congress willing to do what was necessary to solve the problems for the country. What's not happening in the Senate is there's no leadership in the Senate. It's called leader, but there's no leadership in the Senate because the leadership of the Senate now is totally disconnected from what is needed by the country. So instead of the greatest deliberative body in the world, what you have in the Senate today is the greatest political body in the world that doesn't care about deliberation, only cares about winning the next election. There's a lot of ways to cure that. And when you read and see the polling about Congress, and you read the words, and you look at the majority of Americans today believe their member of Congress is part of the problem. And the average member of Congress has a lower reelect than non-reelect. The American people get it. The question is, what can they do about it? And what you have to do is you got to eventually have term limits so that we take the inherent bias of the career politician out of the mix. And we make it not about the politicians, but we return the Senate to about what's in the best interest of the country. And quite frankly, for the last 3.5 years, that hadn't been what's been happening in this body. It's a soulful, shameful period in the history of our country. As the thoughts and creative power of our founders, as they instituted a body that was meant to consider very straightforwardly, very solemnly, every issue that came, that was meant to drive consensus, to force consensus. You can have no consensus when the whole goal is not to solve problems for the country, but to win elections. I'd love to be able to take a poll of Democrat, Republicans, Whigs, and Independents, and everybody else that's ever been in this body. It's less than 2,500. I don't know the exact number. And see what they would say about how the Senate operates today and how it is not doing its job and what is not happening at a time when our country's economic growth is anemic at best, when job creation doesn't come anywhere close to what we need, where deficit spending is a kind of a yawn, and the moral fact that we mortgage every day the future of the next two generations. I'd love to hear what the other senators who've stood in this building would say about what we're doing today. I think it'd be a rousing round of condemnation. So I think it's important for the American people to look at the Senate right now and say, what aren't we doing? What aren't we? I mean, it's true. Social Security disability will go bankrupt next year. That's true. It's true that in less than 15 years, Medicare will be bankrupt. It's true that in less than 18 years, Social Security will be gone. Those are all true things. It's true that we're going to run $500 billion in a deficit, at least $500 billion. That's about $1,400 a person. We're spending more than what we're taking in this year, and we're charging it to the 2 and 3 and 5 and 6-year-olds in this country today. Those are true statements. Is that anywhere close to integrity? Is there any moral value in mortgaging the future of the next generation? I think not. I've listened to a lot of the speeches on the floor this week. I hardly ever come down and talk about once every 2 weeks now, since we have no opportunity to offer amendments or debate our amendments. But I just wonder what the American people must be thinking about what we're not doing, what we're not addressing. The problems that are unfixed, that need a fix, that need a bipartisan solution, that need compromise, that need the power of the original Senate with the rights of the minority and the majority running to where you force a compromise that gives us the best that we can get based on where we are as a country. There's no opportunity for that anymore in this body. We don't pass muster. And we don't pass muster not because there's a lot on both sides of the aisle that don't want to pass muster. It's because the leadership isn't there. The Senate has been run into the ground as far as its intended function and intended working. I think that's highly unfortunate for our country. I think it's highly unfortunate for our children. And in this time of world just morass in trouble all around the world, conflict, complications, difficulty, and in this time when we're having trouble ourselves staying above water in almost every aspect of what we're doing, we need a vigorous, alive, functioning Senate that's full of riveting debate about the issues of today that are presented to our country today. And instead we have political games. And we're going to have political games the rest of the week. I wonder what our future holds when we have this kind of leadership. What does it portend for the country when the Senate of the United States no longer debates the current topics of the issues before the country and spends all its time trying to get its members reelected? That's a sad, sad commentary. And it's a Senate that's very far away from the Senate I joined 10 years ago. I yield the floor.